Check. All right, it's working. Hey. Hi, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. Enjoy our pizza and have a drink. We're going to get started with our presentation. And make sure that you sign in so that you get credit for attending. All right, so this is a presentation that is brought to you by the Northeast Campus History and Philosophy Department and the Connect. What is it? Human Sciences? Yeah, division. Welcome. And our speaker is Dr. Scott Langston. Dr. Scott Langston got his PhD from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He teaches religion and Native American religions, particularly at TCU, Texas Christian University, our neighbor. And he was recently named the Native American Nations and Communities Liaison. He has published many articles on religious topics, and he teaches courses. Our speaker, Dr. Scott Langston.
Yeah, I think I'm going to use this. Can you hear me okay? This is good? Okay, I'm going to come closer to you. This seems to be the row that no one wants to be on. But I really appreciate you coming here. Although I know many of you are here for extra credit, which is like one of the most powerful forces in the world, isn't it? It draws, if you offer it, they will come kind of thing. But I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate being asked to come and speak on this particular topic. It's really an important topic. We don't hear a lot about it, except in November. Native Americans do tend to get a lot more attention than they do the rest of the year. A little bit about me, just to position me in relationship to this topic. I'm not Native American, so I do not speak on behalf of Native peoples. I don't represent them. I'm hopeful that whenever I speak on topics like this, that I can speak in a way that is respectful towards Native peoples and also honors them, and especially those Native peoples who were violently removed from the lands that we're standing on today. And that's one of the kind of harsh realities that we don't talk a lot about in our society, is that the reason why we are right here in this place today is because of the violent removal of Native peoples from their homelands. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Growing up, I grew up in Southeast Texas in a small town in the 1960s and 70s, very conservative town. And I grew up with all the attitudes that you might expect a white guy would have in the 60s and 70s in a small, conservative, fundamentalist Christian environment. I say that, with a sense of shame more than anything else. And I, through a long process, started to move away from those attitudes. You can see from part of my academic background, I came out of that fundamentalist Christian environment, which I'm no longer a part of that. But that was important in shaping how I understood the world, how I understood white people, how I understood Native Americans. I never met a Native American when I was growing up in my town. I don't even know if any lived there, maybe, but I certainly didn't know of any. It was only later in my career where I began to get interested in this. And actually where it started was, I used to teach American history on the Northwest campus at Tarrant County College. And in teaching history there, I began to this sounds dumb to say, but I started having this sense of there's a whole nother side of the story that's not being told. And that's the Native American side of the story. And I got interested in that. I read everything I could read, but I wanted to hear from Native peoples, their understandings and their experiences and their stories from their viewpoint. And so I was fortunate to be able to make connections with Native peoples, and one thing led to another. And now I spend a lot of time in Native communities, working with individuals as well as communities in Dallas-Fort Worth, in Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska. That's a lot of what I do. And my experience with Native peoples has really reshaped me, both as a person, but also professionally. It's really changed the way I teach and what I emphasize. And that's how I got to the position that I hold now at TCU. So the topic for today is dealing with the ongoing legacy of colonization in North Texas. One thing that I'll talk about a little bit later on is colonization is not something that just happened in the past and then it's done with. But colonization is ongoing right now. It is a very powerful force in our society. And I think, this is just my opinion, but I think whenever we talk about the major social justice issues, those around race and gender and whatever, name them, colonization needs to be right up there beside them, gaining equal attention, because it's that powerful of a force that is still present in our society. And so what we're going to talk about today is how do we deal with that ongoing legacy, but in North Texas. How does colonization, how has it been present here in North Texas, and how does it continue to be present? So with that, I think one way that we deal with, I know this is a lot of information, but just a few things I want to highlight here is that one way that we have to deal with the ongoing legacy of colonization is we have to become aware of it. We have to raise awareness of it, because one thing that has been my experience, and I know other people have talked about this, is those attitudes that I held growing up in that small Southeast Texas town, nobody ever stood up like in a classroom or at church or any place like that and said, okay, write this down. White people are superior. Native Americans are inferior. And just go down the list. Nobody said that. Nobody taught it that directly. It was just like as normal and as natural as the paint on this wall. I mean, you were surrounded by it. It was just as normal as the sun coming up every morning. You didn't need to be taught that. And it was just so assumed and so a part of you. So if you were going to challenge those things, I mean, you're like challenging, does the sun come up every morning there? I mean, that's just how commonplace it was. I think colonization is exactly like that. It is so commonplace that we're oftentimes not aware of how we are holding within us colonized attitudes and then acting in colonized ways. And what I mean by that, I'm going to give you a definition of colonization in a minute. But what I mean by that is we're holding attitudes and taking actions that advance the goals of colonization. We may not be aware of it, but we're actually working in those spaces there. So I think one way that we have to deal with it is to start becoming aware of it and aware of how certain attitudes and actions that we have may actually fall into the category of colonization. So part of this raising awareness is understanding who were the original peoples in this area that we now call North Texas. And in terms, there are a lot of Native peoples who over the centuries have passed through this area. But in terms of what we would call ancestral homelands, we're really talking about the Wichita and affiliated tribes. Now, I don't have a map, but if you can envision in your mind, like where the state of Kansas is, and then Oklahoma, and then we have Texas, and go all the way down to about the city of Waco. So from about Kansas to Waco are the ancestral traditional homelands of the Wichita and affiliated tribes. This was the area that they inhabited for hundreds of years. And actually prior to them coming into existence, indigenous peoples were here for thousands of years. So non-indigenous peoples, if you're not indigenous, our presence here is relatively recent. There are other people who have been living and having families, children, living out their lives here for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years. The Wichita affiliated tribes is one of those. Now, the term affiliated tribes actually refers to several other tribes, and these were the Waco, Tawakoni, Kichai, Iskani, Taivaya, and other tribes, and they all kind of conglomerated together, not as a single tribe, but they're separate, but they're related. And that's why they're called the Wichita affiliated tribes. The name Waco is a tribe of these people. They are Caddoan culturally, and the Caddo are the other ancestral tribes that we'll talk about here in just a minute. Just one kind of population estimate is that at first European contact in the 16th century with the Wichita affiliated tribes, one estimate is that there were between 50 and 100,000 of them. It's really difficult to make precise estimates, so you don't want to put too much weight on that, but you get the idea, 50 to 100,000. Today, as of July 2020, there's just over or just under 3,700 citizens of the Wichita affiliated tribes there. You can see the dramatic decrease in population that's taken place over just a few hundred years. That's a product of colonization there. The Wichita affiliated tribes, they served as like a when they think of North Texas, they think of Comanches. And they should, because the Comanches had a big influence in North Texas, but the Comanches came later. They didn't start moving into North Texas, or what we now call North Texas, until like the early 18th centuries into the 19th centuries there. But in those early periods, the Wichita acted as sort of a broker between the Comanches and the goods that they had, and the French and the goods that they had, and they were sort of like a middleman between them. But when you talk about ancestral homelands, Wichita affiliated tribes is the place to start. And then there's the Caddo. Now the Caddo are made up of three groups, Caddo, Hidacho, Natchitoches, and Hasinai. But they're like the Wichita affiliated tribes in that it's a collection, a conglomeration of different tribes that are related linguistically and culturally. But if you can think about the areas that today we call Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, kind of that corner in there, that's the real ancestral homelands of the Caddo. Now, that third group of the Caddo, the Hasinai, they were located primarily in what we call East Texas, and their homeland stretched all the way to the Trinity River. So that gets us into what became the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And then they shared hunting grounds with other tribes that were between the Trinity and the Brazos. So when we talk about who are the ancestral peoples of what became the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, we're talking Wichita affiliated tribes and then Caddo. But there were a lot of other tribes who were coming through, or elements of those tribes that were coming through at different times and for different reasons. Most of them were in the area for relatively short periods of time, but they were here because they were being pushed out of their homelands further east and to the north. So as Americans were starting this westward movement, they were displacing Native peoples out of their homelands where they had lived for hundreds or thousands of years. So they have to go somewhere. And a lot of them were pushed into this area, so that by the time you get to the early mid 1800s, in what became the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, you had a conglomeration of a bunch of different tribes or elements of tribes that were located here. Now, this is where we can start talking about colonization, and I think this introduces us to another way that we have to deal with its ongoing legacies, and that's talking about understanding realities. And this is where the conversation gets difficult, and I will admit this is a hard conversation for us to have. It's not particularly pleasant, and oftentimes people can become defensive about it, but if we're going to deal with colonization, we have to understand the realities of that. I was not taught those realities in school. You probably were not either, or maybe just kind of a surface understanding of them, but it's really a pretty harsh and ugly picture. Now, everybody has their definition of colonization, so this is my definition. It's not necessarily the greatest definition ever written, but it works. You know, it's kind of a working definition for me. So when I think of colonization, I think about those efforts to take Native American lands and resources. Now, this is an oversimplification, but the bottom line of why Europeans and later Americans were interested in these lands that we now call the United States and Canada and Mexico, the bottom line is they wanted the lands and resources. They understood that with those lands and resources came great power and great wealth. They wanted them. The problem they had was there were people who'd been living here for thousands of years. It was their lands and resources. And in fact, if you want to use modern day language, these were sovereign nations. And that's how the Constitution understands Native American tribes. The phrase that's used is that Native American tribes are in a government-to-government relationship with the United States government. They are sovereign nations. Now, what most of us get taught is they were these backward, simple people that were living here. They were tribal. This is an inferior form of government. But the reality is these were sovereign nations living here for thousands of years. Europeans wanted their land, and later Americans wanted their land. And they began the push to get those lands. And the way you get those lands, that Europeans and Americans were to get those lands, is you have to destroy Native American peoples. And you can do that in a variety of ways. Violence is a very popular form that is still ongoing today. There's violence directed towards Native peoples at exceedingly high rates. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the United States found out, fairly quickly, it's very messy just to kill people, although they had no problems doing that. They didn't mind slaughtering Native peoples, but that gets messy and it's very expensive. So the United States also, as well as the Europeans, but the United States also tried this forced assimilation of Native Americans. So what that means is you're going to take Native peoples and you're going to force them to quit being their cultures, living their cultures and their communities, and you force them to become everything American. You force them to convert to Christianity. You force them to stop speaking their languages. And by the way, languages is one of the primary ways that you deliver culture. If you destroy a person's language, you're destroying their culture. The United States had a forced policy of English only and punished Native peoples for speaking their languages. They forced them to begin eating like white Americans, dressing like white Americans, forcing them to adopt capitalism, democracy, individualism, all the stuff that we are today. Native peoples were forced and pressured to assimilate to that. So that what happens is, at least in theory, what's supposed to happen is the person ceases to be a Native American. And actually, it's always best to use the specific tribal affiliation. So the person ceases to be Cherokee, Choctaw, whatever the tribe happens to be, and they become an individual American citizen. That's the goal. So you're not like physically killing them, but you are killing their identities and their cultures through that forced assimilation. And why are you doing that? Because if they're no longer Native American, then it's much easier to take the lands and resources that they and their people had and controlled. And so the United States started that policy from day one of the United States. Still, it continues today, although things have improved, but colonization is still a big threat. But then there's also these colonized ways of thinking and living and colonized systems and processes. So I'm looking at my phone just to keep track of time. right? Because nobody likes a long-winded speaker, so I don't want to do that. I think this is where most of us get swept up into colonization, that we just think in colonized ways. Like we think, well, of course, this is our land and we deserve it more than native peoples do because, you know, whatever reason it is. But we have the right, we have the privilege of taking this land. And okay, we can let native peoples live on it, but it's really our land to use for our purposes. Or we think about native, like when I say Native American, you know, what's the image that comes into your mind? You know, for a lot of people, they'll see something from like the 19th century and teepees and feathers and all that, and not even think about native peoples as doctors and lawyers and politicians and teachers and nurses, you know, very modern people like they are today. That's a colonized way of thinking. And then these systems and processes that we're a part of. I mean, I hate to say it, but we're in a colonized system right now. Education. Western education has been one of the primary tools that the United States used to destroy Native Americans. And the kind of education that's put out about Native peoples, that's intentional. And I'm not necessarily saying that there's somebody sitting in an office right now, you know, saying we're going to intentionally do this. But when the educational system started, what is chosen to be included and what's chosen to be excluded, and everybody has to make these choices, that's an intentional decision. And when we intentionally decide that we're not going to talk much about Native peoples, and what we are going to talk about is kind of a glamorous, you know, westward movement of civilization and bringing all this great stuff to the continent, that's colonization. That's how a system is ingraining within us these colonized ideas, the land systems that we work under. Remember what the ultimate goal of colonization is: get the lands and benefit from them, the resources. Well, almost immediately after Europeans and Americans would take land, they would put systems in place to distribute that land to non-native peoples. And so the land systems that we are forced to live in today, that's a colonized system as well. We're not even aware of it, but that's how colonization works. And then, as I've been talking about, colonization is not something that just was done in the past and is over with. It is ongoing today. It is alive and well. It may take on different forms, but it's very much alive and well. And then I also want to add to this that the Native peoples have been extraordinarily resilient in their ability to survive colonization. Now, one thing that we probably all know from our education is that a lot of Native people were killed. But what we don't often hear about that is that Native people have survived that. And they are building communities. And they took a hit. I mean, it was a pretty serious hit that they took. But they're pushing through that, and they are surviving, and they're sophisticated. And they're modern, and they're contemporary, and their cultures are very much compatible with the modern world if we'll listen. And if we'll listen to them, there's a lot that we can learn in dealing with some of the most pressing problems that we face today, globally as well as nationally there. Now, just very quickly on some of the impacts of Euro-American colonization, massive population decline. Again, estimating what the population was in 1491 prior to when Columbus accidentally ran into the Bahamas. And I say accidentally because he had no clue what was here. He thought he was in Asia, but when he accidentally ran into that, it's difficult to estimate the population. You can see these are different estimates. They're all over the place, but you know, around 40 million or so is somewhere in the ballpark. Today in the 2020 census, there were 9.7 million. That's actually a rebound of Native peoples. In 1900, in the United States Census, there was approximately 237,000 Native peoples counted. Now think about that. If you go from like 40 million to 237,000, that's a massive population decline. And so we can say, oh, that's tragic, all these people died. But now think about some of the ramifications of that. In a democracy, if you only, at best case, account for 2.9% of the population, how many elections are you going to win? Not very many. How often are you going to get somebody who is elected who will take up the concerns of your particular group if you're only making up 2.9% of the population? Not many at all. That's a major implication of colonization that continues to play out today. And then there's this massive land loss, billions of acres. So think about this, in a capitalistic society, what is land and the resources that are in the land? That is wealth. We're all interested, we want to buy a house. It's a great investment. The resources that are underneath the land brings a lot of wealth. So what we can really talk about, I think what would be more accurate is, rather than a loss of land, we should talk about the transfer of wealth that took place between native peoples and non-native peoples. And even transfer of wealth is too nice of a term, because it wasn't like native people were saying, here, yeah, come take it. We don't want it. It was violently taken from them. So it's the violent transfer of wealth. Imagine if native peoples controlled that land today. Where would be the center of power economically? It would be in native nations, among them. And then tremendous cultural, social, political, economic losses that go along with that. Just one example of this, in native communities, elders are highly revered, highly respected peoples. They're like libraries. They have the cultural knowledge, the ways of surviving and thriving, and how to be that particular culture. But traditionally, this knowledge is passed down orally. If you start wiping out large chunks of the population, and especially the elders, you're losing cultural knowledge. This is why COVID hit so many native cultures so hard. It killed, in some of the cultures, it killed a lot of elders. And that's tragic, the personal death. But also with the death of the elder comes the loss, oftentimes, of language as well as cultural knowledge there. This is all the result of colonization. Now, just to give you an idea on the 2020 Native American population in Dallas, Tarrant County, you can see, there's tens of thousands of native peoples who live here today. Most of the time, people are not aware of a native community, but there is well over 100,000 native peoples, maybe over 200,000 native peoples living in Dallas-Fort Worth today. And these are examples of how colonization continues on today. Just as a reminder that colonization is ongoing. So you have, like up in the top left, this "Don't let ICWA be the first domino." ICWA is the Indian Child Welfare Act that was passed by Congress in 1978. The reason why Congress passed that is because Native American children were being adopted out of their families at rates higher than any other group in the United States. And what that meant is it was largely white people adopting Native American children. Then those children would be raised as white people, not as Native people. And this was another way that the federal government was seeking to assimilate Native Americans. So Congress passed this law that said, we got to take some steps to ensure that Native people have more of a say in how their children are raised. It's a very important law. It is being challenged today by a couple from Fort Worth, and the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, is hearing arguments about this case, and they will rule on it very soon. If they overturn this, this will be a massive blow to Native Americans' ability to control how their own children are raised. Keller High School, I don't mean to pick on Keller High School, but I put this up here as an example of places that use Native Americans as mascots, sports mascots. You can see down here on the right corner, I think that guy comes from the Kansas City Chiefs. Most Native Americans will tell you mascots do not honor them. Mascots are a major power play. If you know the history of colonization in the Americas, and for someone to then come to Native people and say, you're going to be my mascot, that's not a point of respect. That's a power play, that I have power over you. It's like, you know, here's an animal that I shot and killed, and I'm going to hang its head on my wall. That's kind of where mascots fall in that. And like this guy on the right here, you see he's wearing a headdress. Among Plains Indians, a headdress is something that you have to earn. And it's only, the only people who are allowed to wear this are people of great respect, great leaders who've performed great deeds within their particular tribal community. But what happens when you make it a mascot? Here you put it on and you go to a sporting event and you take something that's very sacred and you kind of trample on it. You make it ordinary. And you don't ask permission to take it, you just take it. That's that colonized attitude. It's my right to take it. And what does it hurt? It's not hurting me. I'm honoring you. You're not asking the people that you're trying to honor there. That's colonization. To the left of the guy in the headdress is missing and murdered Indigenous women. Indigenous women go missing or are murdered at higher rates than any other group in the United States. But how often do you hear about that? Rarely. Coverage has gotten a little bit better, but not great. And Indigenous women have been going missing and being murdered since Columbus came in 1492. This is not a new problem, but it's one that's skyrocketing in the United States. I put the Alamo there. Okay, so I'm a native Texan, so whenever I see the Alamo, my heart beats fast. Oh, the Alamo, how great. But reality, the Alamo is an institution of colonization. Why was the Alamo built? The Spanish built this mission so that they could, as part of their efforts, to take the lands and resources and force Native peoples to convert to Christianity. It's a beautiful story about what the Texans did. You know, they're fighting for freedom and all. Great story, makes great movies and all that. But the other side of that story is it's about the colonization of the Americas. And then a couple of the other pictures where you see land there, these are modern conflicts that are going on of taking native lands from them and benefiting from the resources that are in there. And then right in the middle is a picture of the former president. He's supposedly honoring two Navajo code talkers. Navajo code talkers are revered for what they did in World War II. They used their language to send very important, sensitive messages between the Allies, and the Germans couldn't crack it, or the Japanese could not crack their language. They couldn't understand Navajo. And there were other tribes who had code talkers, very revered people here. So the former president brought them to the White House to honor them. But do you notice anything about that picture that's not so honorable? What's that? Andrew Jackson. You see the portrait behind him is Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is the architect of Indian removal from the Southeast. So you like Trail of Tears, the Cherokee Trail of Tears? It was Jackson's policies that made the Trail of Tears possible. How do you honor people when you put the architect of Indian removal right behind them, looking down upon them? A lot of Native people picked up on that. And then right above that is Deb Haaland. She is currently the Secretary of the Interior, first ever Native American to be a cabinet secretary. Now think about that. In over almost 250 years, we're talking about the first of a Native American. This particular picture, though, is from prior to that, when she was elected to Congress. She and one other Native woman was elected a few years ago. First time we had two women, Native women in Congress in over 200 years of our nation. Yeah, that you talk about democracy. Where does democracy exist for Native peoples. Democracy is also a colonized process. And then this quote from a Native film director talks about the influence of the Bible and movies. That some of the most damaging influences to Native people has been the Bible and has been movies. I mean, most of my knowledge growing up about Native Americans came from movies and TV shows. And I mean, they're cringeworthy. I go back and look at the cartoons that I watched as a little kid and how Native peoples are portrayed in them. And I look at the movies that I loved, and look at how Native peoples are portrayed in them. It's cringeworthy there. But what did it do? It shaped my attitudes toward Native peoples there. The Bible, the reason why he mentions the Bible is because Christianity has been one of the most destructive forces towards Native Americans. The colonization of the Americas was inspired by Christianity, was authorized by Christianity, and it was carried out by Christians. And I'm not talking like fringe, nutcase people. These were mainstream Christians who used their American Christianity and European Christianity to, in essence, justify, okay, so I'm going to drop the G word here. This is the nuclear option, who used Christianity to justify a genocide against people. And I don't use that term lightly. And I haven't always been comfortable in using the term genocide to characterize what happened to Native peoples. But if you go to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum website, they have the characteristics that have to occur for something to be considered a genocide. And this comes from the United Nations in the 1940s, right after World War II, deciding what genocide was. From my perspective, the United States checks off all the boxes there. And I know there's disagreement for that. Some people prefer the term ethnic cleansing. Other people prefer different terms. But I think what we have to talk about in dealing with the ongoing legacy of colonization is this idea that the United States was founded on a Christian genocide perpetrated against Native American peoples. Now, the Doctrine of Discovery is one of the primary doctrines that were used to colonize the Americas. And it was a doctrine or a policy that developed among European nations over about 150 years. So, its form takes on different shapes, but kind of the bottom line of the Doctrine of Discovery said this, that whenever a European country discovered lands here, that particular country immediately got all of the governmental rights over the people living there. They got all the ownership rights to those lands, the economic rights over those people, as well as the religious rights, just by virtue of discovering them. The Doctrine of Discovery was developed as a way for European countries to sort out the land claims they were going to make to this continent amongst themselves. It didn't really consider Native American claims, even though Native peoples had been living here for thousands of years. And the Doctrine of Discovery is the foundation of the United States land claims. The U.S. Supreme Court in 1824 affirmed that the Doctrine of Discovery was the valid foundation of American land claims, and that has never been overturned. The Doctrine of Discovery is thoroughly Christian, and I just give here a couple of excerpts from Pope Alexander VI, who the year after Columbus's first voyage, he issues this declaration called Inter Cetera, which he gives to the King and Queen of Spain, for whom Columbus had sailed for. And basically what he did is he used his authority as the Pope to give indigenous lands to the King and Queen of Spain. But then he said to them, the number one thing you must do is convert these people to Christianity. to Roman Catholic Christianity. And he commanded them to send missionaries there. That's why I think, or one reason why I think you can argue that the colonization of the Americas was a thoroughly Christian affair. You have the Pope authorizing it. You see the inspiration coming from biblical passages as well as theology. And then you see the people doing the actual colonization are Christians. And this is something that most Christian denominations still today have not dealt with. They either don't recognize it or won't recognize it, and certainly won't deal with it. And that then perpetuates this ongoing colonization. Of course, manifest destiny, which I think you could call it manifest Christian destiny, because it's the idea that God created the United States for a specific, special purpose, which was to spread across the continent, spreading Christianity and democracy and capitalism and individualism and, you know, everything American. And what you see, this is a famous painting from the 1800s, very popular among Americans, where you see, you know, the United States moving westward. What you probably can't see in the darkness there is that what's being pushed out are animals and Native Americans. And this was a typical way of viewing the American progress moving west there. Now, I think one way of dealing with colonization is that we have to start thinking differently about our history. And this is something that a Kiowa elder said to me a number of years ago. She said, the Americans did not bring us freedom because we were free before the Americans ever came. So now think about that. You know, the way I've been taught American history is that it's this grand story of the progress of freedom. And there are great instances of freedom being pushed out in the United States. That is definitely a beautiful aspect of the United States. But from a Native American perspective, this has not been freedom because they already had freedom. What the United States brought them was misery and suffering. And along those lines, a very significant scholar of American Indian law wrote in 1942 that the people whom Indian peoples had to be protected against the most were settlers, as well as traders, fur traders. You know, now think about the settlers. You know, we talk about this grand and glorious movement of the United States West, bringing all this wonderful stuff to us. And it's a beautiful picture. It makes beautiful movies, makes beautiful books to talk about. But in reality, these people were moving west so that they could take the lands of Native Americans. And they were pushing the federal and state governments to enact policies that would, the word we usually use is remove Indian peoples, but I heard recently a Native scholar who said the word, we should use a modern word, which is deport Indian peoples. And that what happened to Native Americans is the largest mass deportation in American history. It was the individuals, my ancestors, who were pressuring the federal and state governments to, now, so I'm going to use language from a Native perspective, to invade sovereign nations and kill the people living there and remove them so that we could take their land. Now, I know we talk about the American experience as this great movement west of bringing civilization and freedom and so on. But if you turn that around and you look at it from a Native American perspective, it's an invasion by foreign nations coming to take their lands and to kill them and remove them. And this is why this guy in 1942, you know, rather miraculously could conclude that the real threat to Native peoples were the settlers. Yeah, the American government has plenty that we can bash it for, but the American government was oftentimes acting because of the pressure coming from the individual settlers to gobble up that land. So how does this relate to Dallas-Fort Worth? So the beginning of the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex. And this is another way to deal with colonization is I think we have to reveal the realities. So in late 1838, the president of the Republic of Texas, Maribel B. Lamar, declared, you can see his words there, declared what he called an exterminating war against all the Indian peoples living in the boundaries of Texas. And his intention was the total extinction or total expulsion of all Indian peoples. I think this is an example of genocide. If you say, I'm going to go to war against you and my purpose is to kill all of you or to run all of you out, I mean, I don't know what else you would call that. So that he started that war, and it went on for a couple of years. In late 1840, spring 1841, Native peoples were attacking settlements along the Red River. And you know, Native peoples are just like any other people. They're not perfect people. Atrocities were committed sometimes, just like white people committed atrocities. But Native peoples did attack the settlers who were moving in, and they were denounced as savages and bloodthirsty for doing that. But why were they doing that? You have to think about it. Why were Native peoples attacking these settlers up along the Red River? It's because they were invading their country. The people we now call Texans were invading another country with the sole purpose of removing Native peoples and taking those lands. So they did what any of us would do. They fought back. They were fighting for their very existence, and it got ferocious. Well, as a part of that exterminating war, on May 24th, 1841, General Edward H. Tarrant, for whom Tarrant County is named after, led a group of Texas militia who included Captain John B. Denton, for whom Denton is named after. And they had a surprise attack on 3 villages or 3 settlements of Native peoples that were living along what today we call Village Creek. Village Creek is roughly where the boundaries of Fort Worth and Arlington now exist. He did this surprise attack against them. There were a number of Native peoples living there, many of them because they had been run out of East Texas by the Texans. They killed, according to the official report by the Texans, they counted 12, but the guy who wrote the report said it was likely a lot more than that because there was so much blood on the ground. And then after that, the Texans looted these villages, took a lot of the goods of Native peoples and resold them for their own profit. And then as a result of that, Native peoples began to realize that it was no longer safe to be here. So they left. And then within a few weeks or a few months after that attack, the white settlers began moving in, colonizing this area. That's when John Neely Bryant, who is considered to be the founder of Dallas, that's when he came. But I would argue that's the beginning of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. So that the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex is founded on the violent removal of Native American peoples. And every place you walk today, every step you take, you're able to walk on that land because of what happened back here in this violent removal. And that's where I think, we can't go back in time and change that. But I think one thing we can do is to start dealing with some of these harsh realities of what that has brought us and how we are benefiting and profiting from what originally was a violent removal. And I don't think it lessens it any just because it was a long time ago and none of us were around. But the Wichita and affiliated tribes, the Caddo, these other tribes, they're still around. They're having to live under an occupation of Americans being forced into these different worlds. There are historical markers about it. The Village Creek Massacre, and this one is, if you go to the Lake Arlington golf course, I think it's on the 7th tee, you'll see a historical marker because it was somewhere in that area where it's thought that this battle took place. Most people think now it's underneath Lake Arlington, the actual site, and this is close to it. And that's about all that it is. So that, what have we turned it into? It's a golf course now, but it would be a very sacred site, I think, for Native peoples. And part of this is a newspaper article from the Dallas Morning News, 1949. It's talking about the founding of Oak Cliff in Dallas. And it says, about this time, white people came and a few were settling in that area. I'm not for sure about the veracity of everything it says, but what I think is interesting is this bottom statement of how it explains the so-called real beginning of Oak Cliff. They were the courageous vanguard of the mighty immigrant army that was to follow. And you see how that's being portrayed? They're courageous people, and they probably were. I mean, they were putting their lives at risk, but at risk for what? For invading another nation and violently taking away that nation's land. But it's not portrayed like that. This is colonization, how we tell these stories, and from whose perspective that we tell them. And there are examples like this all over the Metroplex to talk about how people first started coming, white people first started coming here. It's almost always portrayed in these very glowing sorts of terms. Well, we're almost out of time, and I want to see if y'all maybe have questions or comments, but I did want to mention that there is this destruction through education. There's been a lot of talk lately about the boarding schools that Americans forced Native children to go to, take them away from their families, send them sometimes hundreds, thousands of miles away. And in those schools, everything Native was being scrubbed out of them and being replaced with everything American. And this is a famous picture from the 1800s where this is an Apache man, or Apache boy, who was sent to one of those schools. This is how he showed up. And then within a few weeks, you can see he's being completely transformed. The only thing they couldn't change about him was the color of his skin. But the language, his haircut, his hairstyle, the foods he ate, what he was going to do for the rest of his life, the religion that he practiced, his understanding of what a family was, all of that was being forced onto him from a Western Christian perspective. And this is what the boarding schools did, this destruction through education. And this is one reason why I think education has a lot of introspection to do, not only for that, but for also how we portray these particular events. Of course, the selling of Indian land, but I want to skip very quickly. I wanted to talk about relocation program in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, but really we don't have time for doing that. But I did want to mention the Native American resilience, that Native peoples have had to live through all of this. And a very common theme among them oftentimes is they have to live in two worlds. They have a choice to either completely assimilate to the dominant society and give up their cultural ways, or they can try to hang on to them. But then the reality is, they have to go get a job, they have to buy a house, they have bills to pay, they have to live in two worlds. So they have to pick up skills to live successfully in the Western world, and many of them are extraordinarily successful. But then they also they want to hold on to their own cultural ways, and that they're trying to do this in a society that doesn't really recognize the validity of it or is hostile to it. And that can be quite a challenge for Native peoples. But locally, there are a number of institutions that Native people have developed. American Indian Heritage Day in Texas, the Indigenous Institute of the Americas, MMIW, Missing Murdered Indigenous Women, Texas Rematriate is a local organization. The Dallas Indian United Methodist Church, Texas Native Health. These are all local Native American organizations where these 100, 200,000 Native peoples are thriving and continuing this process of carrying on their cultures in these two worlds. And I'll just end it with this last question. That I think this is the really challenging question to us. And that is, we have to think about, what does it mean to be perpetrators, heirs, and beneficiaries of colonization? whether we're perpetrating it accidentally or whether, like with me, my ancestors, I mean, they were all my ancestors were poor people, but they were still colonizers. So I'm the heir to that and the beneficiary of it. I'm a great beneficiary of that. We all are. We're here because of colonization. We can't change that. But I think the conversation has to turn towards, well, what does it mean to be perpetrators, heirs, and beneficiaries of colonization? And what responsibilities does that bring today? You know, is it we just have a single session once a year in November and then that's it? Or do we move on to other things like raising awareness, dealing with realities, changing how we think about things in other ways? So I will leave it at that and just ask, I mean, do we have time for questions or do y'all need to take off? And what I've gone to here, we don't have time to talk about it, but at TCU a couple of years ago, we had the president of the Wichita and affiliated tribes and the tribal chairperson for the Alabama Coshawta tribe of Texas come and talk to us about what are our responsibilities and how do we go about reconciling with Native peoples. And these were some of the things that they said that we could do. And I think it's just tremendously insightful as to what they said that we as non-natives ought to start doing there. So I'll just leave that up there.
So when you were talking about the population of Native people, you know, it decreased and then it's slightly increasing, you were speaking about immigration?
No, I mean, these would be Native peoples within the United States. And so when the population declines because of disease and war and so on. So it bottoms out, but then when it started coming back up as Native peoples are starting to recover from it. So these are not Native peoples coming from outside of the United States. These are Native peoples who they're starting to experience some population growth because of some improved conditions.
Okay, and then
and I would also say I think it's also a way that we count this, because one reason for the jump in the 2020 census is that people can designate either one race or ethnic group or two races or ethnic groups. And there are many people that have a mixed indigenous ancestry, so they're checking that box now, so that's going to push the numbers up.
And then can you go back to that slide about the Bible and everything?
About what?
The Bible and everything?
It was at the first, right? That one?
I think
Before that?
before that.
Oh, that one?
No, the one before that maybe. Oh, I don't know then. Well, the quote just of that Native American, yeah. The only thing more that one. I mean, you said the Bible and Christianity. I mean, I just don't understand. Well, I mean, like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think where you're headed is a really great question. You know, how can the Bible and Christianity be destructive? So destructive? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is that okay? So, what European and American Christians did is they made intentional choices about what biblical passages and what doctrines that they were going to use and emphasize as they colonized the Americas. And they chose particular passages and doctrines that justified their killing of Native Americans. They could have chosen a bunch of other passages that would have stopped that and would have emphasized social justice ideas, but they did not. And I'll give you one example of that. One of the most popular biblical passages used by European and American Christians since Columbus came was the biblical story of the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. So the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt according to the biblical story. God saved them, God brought them out of slavery, and then he brought them to Canaan, which is called the Promised Land. And God had promised the Israelites that they were going to live there. Well, before the Israelites moved in to take possession of this land, God told them, okay, there are people who live here. They're called the Canaanites. And what you're supposed to do, this is in the book of Deuteronomy, he says, kill every Canaanite there is. Men, women, children, babies, kill them all. It's in the book of Deuteronomy. You can look it up. And the justification that's given is if you allow them to live beside you, they're idolaters. They worship false gods. They're going to cause you to start worshiping false gods, and then you're going to have trouble with me, because you're worshiping the wrong God. Well, in European and American history, the idea of leaving Egypt, that was Europe. Crossing the Atlantic Ocean, that was the Israelites going through the desert to go to the Promised Land. And the Promised Land was here. Oftentimes, the Americas is referred to as the Promised Land. Well, in that scenario, who are Native Americans? They're Canaanites. And Americans at times would call them red Canaanites. So what do you do to Canaanites? You kill them. You remove them. And that was used over and over and over again to justify what European and American Christians did to Native Americans. That's just one story from the Bible that was used in that way. Yeah. Great questions. Yes.
I had a question. Do I need to use so some would argue that the most important thing about history is like learning from it, obviously. And it's important like that we cover these topics, and what happened to the natives was bad, but like there are still like places that this is happening like to today, like for obviously like in Palestine, like that's where I'm from, like it's happening to them right now,
Yep.
and we're really not doing anything about it. So my question is like what's that all about, like?
Yeah, you're exactly right. So I would say two things to that. One, it's still happening to Native Americans today. So it's not something from the past, but this, effort to destroy and take their lands, that's still ongoing. So we haven't even dealt with it here. But you're exactly right about what's going on in Palestine as well as other places. So this is not a uniquely American action. It's kind of a human, I guess, action because it happens in so many places. In China with the Uyghurs, who are Muslims who are being sent to re-education, so-called re-education camps. This happens all over the place. I don't know what to do about it. If I did, I'd probably be writing a book and, making thousands of dollars whenever I speak and all that. But all I know to do is that I think we have to start exposing these things and confronting them where we can and making sure that we get the history right. Like one of the tribal chair people said, make sure we get to tell history from our perspectives so that we can use that to expose what is going on in these places. Now, I can't, just individually, I can't deal with all of these issues in the world. I don't have that kind of power, but I can support people who are dealing with that. and then I can try in my own corner of the world, Dallas, Fort Worth, to do some of these actions and then pass the baton off to somebody else. I think these are things that have occurred, that have been hundreds of years in the making. They're not going to change overnight, but we still have to keep pushing that and pass the baton so that they will change. That's not a very good answer. I wish I did say do this, this, and this, and they'll be solved, but I can't do that. But you're exactly right to put this in a global perspective for that. And I will say this, a lot of Native peoples have great support for Palestinians. Not all of them, but many of them do, because sometimes it's said, some people will say, that Native Americans are the Palestinians of the United States. That is like, you know, people, original inhabitants, having their lands taken, being pushed into camps, reservations, where they have to live. And so a lot of Native peoples show great support for Palestinians in that regard.
Hello. All right. So recently, whenever you go to conferences or any kind of large meetings, there are land acknowledgements that whenever you introduce yourself, you tell, you know, on whose land you are currently standing. And some critics have said that this is just, you know, it doesn't really do any good. It doesn't serve any purpose. And you only really do it during November, like you said. Is there a reason why we should be doing that? Should we be doing that?
That's a great question. TCU has a land acknowledgement. And let me get to it. I can show it to you. I think, for one, you're exactly right that oftentimes land acknowledgements are nothing more than window dressing. And they don't do a lot. However, there we go. So in TCU, we worked with the Wichita and affiliated tribes to put up this monument on our campus that acknowledges that we're on their ancestral homelands. We first asked permission from the Wichita and affiliated tribes to do this, and then they worked with us equally to create this. This was in 2018, and then in 2021, TCU officially adopted this land acknowledgement for the university. And the reason why we did that is because we created what we call a Native American Advisory Circle, which is made up of about 8 or 9 Native peoples, both at TCU and outside of TCU. And the Wichita and affiliated tribes has a representative on that. And they advise and guide us. And the first thing they said to us is, you need to have a land acknowledgement. So we worked with that circle to create this land acknowledgement, and then thankfully our administration accepted it completely, did not change a word of it. Okay, now if that's all we did, we're going, okay, check that off. It's pretty meaningless. It's just a trinket, like the monument is just a trinket that adorns the campus. But the land acknowledgement can be a very powerful tool for leveraging change. It should be a step, one of many steps that we take. It's an important step, but it can't be a final step. And what we've been able to do with the land acknowledgement is, one, is it gets the university on record. And now we can go back to them and say, okay, you know, you said we're going to acknowledge that. So what are we going to do about that? You know, how are we going to make this a better, more inclusive place? It's a great tool to leverage. I play the land acknowledgement card all the time at TCU, you know, with that. We also, like this semester, just a couple of weeks ago, we had a workshop for faculty on teaching with the land acknowledgement. You know, how do you take the, there are a lot of ideas and perspectives that are just oozing out of this acknowledgement. It's only a few sentences, but each one of those sentences is the beginning of a pathway into learning about more perspectives and ideas that we can use to better educate our students in. So how do we go about doing that? So we can use it for that. It was also a great thing to build trust with Native American communities, because that's one of the things that we are often asked. Do you have a land acknowledgement? And if we say no, more often than not, that's a negative thing. But when we say yes, it's positive, but then they want to know, okay, that's good. So what else are you doing? That's a long answer to say they can be worthless or they can be extraordinarily powerful. It depends on what you do with them. And I'll give another anecdote to that. I had a TCU student who came to see me this semester, not in one of my classes. I didn't know her, but she was working on a paper, an ethnographic study, and she was interested in Native Americans. And she told me that when she came to visit TCU as a prospective student, they read the land acknowledgement to the prospective students. And she said that just triggered something in her head, that she became really interested in what is this, who are the Wichita, what's going on. And now she's following that up in her academic study. She's pursuing that. Now that's one student, that's anecdotal, but that is an illustration of how it can raise awareness and be a good tool for doing that. So I'm an advocate of them if you're going to do something with them.
Okay, so let's wrap this up, I guess. No more questions. I'll finish with one more question so that we can send this away. What then, assuming that you have created, all of us advocates now, what then can we do? What should we be doing? What's your words of wisdom?
Mm-hmm. Surely you have Native students who are coming to Tarrant County College. I definitely would be in dialogue with them. I would try to start building trust with local Native communities. That takes time. I mean, they have 500 plus years of not trusting non-natives and especially not trusting educational institutions. So I would take efforts to start building relationships with the local communities and then let them guide you on what you should do as an institution and what would be significant and what would be beneficial, rather than you telling them, this is what we're going to do for you. Ask them, what do you think we should do? What would be significant? What would be an important step forward for TCC to take? And there's so many things, from building an infrastructure to making this place welcoming of Native peoples, to where it's okay to express that you're Native, to transforming curriculum into it. I would say to the students, ask your professors why they don't talk about Native peoples. Ask them that. Put the heat on them to learn about Native peoples and to incorporate their perspectives, not just in history classes, but economics. I mean, some of these Native nations are extraordinarily successful when it comes to economics. Windstar Casino, that's Native owned. They own what's probably the largest casino in the world. I mean, they're like really entrepreneurial. Some of them can be, others are very poor and all that. We have a lot that we can learn from them. And then the final thing I would say about that is what Native Elder taught me very early on is we need to change the way that we talk from learning about Native peoples to learning from Native peoples, because they have a lot to teach us if we will listen and we'll build that trust with them, to learn from them rather than learn about them.
And ancestral peoples of Central and South America, including Mexico, are also colonized individuals. So knowing your own roots too, I think. There's a lot of our students that have Indigenous backgrounds that may not even know about that because histories have been erased and we are not encouraged to know those histories, and assimilation has also happened. So I think that would be another thing I would encourage people to do, is to kind of investigate your own cultural backgrounds and think about your own Indigenous roots. But there are the same stories in our Central and South American countries as well.
That is such a great point. I just had coffee yesterday with a TCU alum who was adopted. This was another policy of the United States, adopting Native children out to non-Native families as a way to assimilate them. She was adopted, and she only recently learned that she has significant Indigenous ancestry that's both Apache and connected into Mexico. This is such a common story where Indigenous peoples of Mexico and other Central and Southern American nations were cut off from their heritage and their cultures because of colonization, and the stories get lost, so that a lot of people today, through no fault of their own, as you said, don't even know of their Indigenous ancestry and cultures because colonization did that to them. That was the purpose of colonization, to make you think you're not even Indigenous. And it's been very successful for that. So there's this whole like revitalization, reconnection that should take place. And I affirm what you said. That's a great point. All right, are y'all beat down? Okay, thanks a lot. Good luck with your finals. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
A round of applause.